You might have asked yourself the question, if the US spends so much on national defense, why do countries like China and Russia have the ability to pose a threat to the United States? The answer to that is actually pretty detailed, and it depends on the country that you're wanting to compare the United States to. So in this video, we're just going to lay the foundation and answer the question, is the US national defense budget really as big as it appears when you compare it to other countries? Before we get to the video, I just want to say that this is the first video that I'm going to be doing in conjunction to the actual academic research that I'm doing. My hope is at the end of the summer, I will have a published article pertaining to the military that will be in an academic journal. So as I'm going through and learning some of this, I want to share this information with you and kind of help you see some of the things that I'm learning about and some of the questions that I am asking. Now, this also helps me because I retain information best by sharing it with others. So if you are able to support me as I do this research and also research into the future, you guys know I would greatly appreciate it. Patreon is a great way to be able to do that. It will help with things like access to some resources, be able to pay for things like textbooks, tuition, all that type of stuff. So in the description below, you will find the link to Patreon. Also, since this is a YouTube channel, I have to tell you guys to please like, subscribe, and also share this if you found some information that you think other people might benefit from hearing this as well. Okay, so let's get back to it. So it seems like that whenever the US defense budget is discussed, people always have to say it is equal to the X amount of countries combined. Like, the US spends so much that it's the equivalent of the next 15 countries combined, something like that. So how do all these other countries have these assets and programs that we're talking about challenging the US when we're outspending them by so much? Some easy answers to this really come to mind, like the increased costs of a global presence, where a significant portion of our adversaries are more regionally based, and that's where they're focused on. But we also have access to a lot of resources that helps us understand the military budget of the US. And so while some answers to this are pretty simple, we can take a deeper dive to see the complexity of the US defense budget and how it compares to some other countries. We'll also be able to see why our operational advantage isn't as proportional to our spending advantage. Now, the defense budget overview is a document that is published by the Department of Defense, and it is 108 pages long. It gives us that detailed information that I was talking about. You can see information like what requests are being made to Congress for the 2019 fiscal year, to understand some of the projects that the various branches are wanting to pay for, and also see a detailed breakdown of how that money is being spent. This is a 108-page document, as I said, so it would take more than one video to kind of go into. So we're going to be focusing on the things pertaining to this question that I'm trying to understand a little bit more. Fortunately for us, what we're trying to take a look at here in this video, the Department of Defense's budget overview does have a table which breaks down some of the categories in which they're looking to spend money in fiscal year 2019. And here is that table for you to view. Now, one of the things that's important to kind of call out is RDT&E represents research, development, test, and evaluation. So as you see that in a couple of different areas, just know that that's what that means. Now, I'm a very visual person, and so a table doesn't necessarily help me understand how this kind of compares to one another. So here's a quick bar chart that illustrates it. You can see that operations and maintenance comprises the largest category of spending, and I'll kind of show you a pie chart here as well that also kind of helps illustrate it. Now, the second largest category of spending is military personnel at $152.9 billion. And when I saw this brought something to mind that I hadn't considered, and that is that this is just military personnel that we're understanding the labor costs for. Now, the Department of Defense is much more than just military personnel. There is a large amount of civilian personnel who help out in the Department of Defense. So what does the labor cost really look like when you also throw civilian labor into this? So fortunately for us, on page 56 of the budget overview, there is a table. Now, this table is a lot more messy and more complicated than what I had just shown you. So let me break this down a little bit more for you. So taking a look at this table, it represents pay and benefits funding that the Department of Defense is looking to fund in fiscal year 2019. What you're going to want to take a look at is fiscal year 2019 requests, that column, and the row that says total pay and benefits. Where it meets up, it shows that $268.5 billion of the defense budget is going to go to labor costs, whether that's just base pay and also benefits. The two rows above it show the costs for civilian and military personnel, again, for pay and benefits. Now, if you take a look a couple rows down, there's a section that says total pay and benefits as percent of the base budget. So 43.5% of the base budget goes towards labor costs. That is huge. Now, to kind of break this down a little bit more, though, the base budget is different than the total budget. So you also have a category called overseas contingency. You also have emergency funding. So when you go ahead and take that into consideration, total labor costs represent 39.14% of the $686 billion budget request in fiscal year 2019. $268.5 billion for total pay and benefits, from what I was able to find, is larger than the total amount of costs for China and Russia's defense budget combined. There I go, using the combined again, but it's important to illustrate how much of this is labor costs. In a lot of informal conversations that I've seen regarding how our budget compares to other countries, the topic of labor is barely even touched. And even in some formal conversations and interviews with experts, again, they don't touch the topic of how much of our military budget goes to paying salaries and providing benefits for people. Now, that is somewhat surprising too in retrospect, because if you take a look at a lot of companies or organizations, a lot of times their largest expense is going to be these personnel costs. And it's also one of the areas that companies look to as their largest controllable expense in even more cases too. They'll do things like reduce the amount of promotions. They'll decrease costs due to attrition, like letting more people go than those who are coming in, or they'll do things like layoffs. And when we've seen budget reductions too, some of those trends have even been seen in the military as well. I will say right here, just as a side note, that I am glad and proud that we do provide some of the best wages and benefits for our service members of any country. It is important with an all-volunteer force that we're making sure that we're providing benefits and salaries that are attractive to be able to help people feel more comfortable with making the decision, or to draw more people towards recruitment into the armed forces. Though, to get back on topic here about how this compares to other militaries, we need to take a look at how much of this pay disparity exists between us and other countries. So let's take a diver deep into that. I wanted to take a look at how Russia and China paid their troops so we could do a comparison, but it wasn't as easy to find that information as I had initially expected. And with this being an answer to a question that is part of a larger thing that I'm looking into, I didn't dive too deep into it. I'm sure I could find some more information, and even the stuff that I did find came from state sources, so I kind of question the legitimacy of it, but I was able to find some information. So here we go. So let's start taking a look at pay for the U.S. Armed Forces. Now, this chart I was able to find online illustrates the monthly salary to certain members of the military that are enlisted and equates to their years of service. So we're going to look at E1, 2-year service or less. So every month, these service members will get $1,680.83. There are other benefits and perks that aren't factored into this, but we're just going to take a look at base pay. So keep that $1,680.83 in mind, because I'm going to take a look at it here in just a second. Now, the information that I was able to find very quickly was Russia's military pay. Now, I'm going to be showing you a table that is from Russia's military recruitment website. Keep in mind, it is in Russian, but thanks to the joy of the internet, I was able to translate some of this. So again, let me break this down for you. This table is actually pretty similar to what you saw before. It shows some of the different ranks, time in the position, stuff like that. What we're going to want to take a look at, though, is the cell in the top right, the 23,400. That represents 23,400 ruble that a basically new service member, the equivalent of our E1, would get paid. So this also doesn't factor in some of the other benefits that the Russian government will provide, like housing, food, and things like that. Also keep in mind that the Russian military has a strong base of conscripts, so they don't have to entice people to fill their ranks in the same way that the United States does with an all-volunteer force. So what does 23,400 ruble a month equate to? Well, that's $361.30 a month. Now remember, we pay our personnel $1,680.83 for the equivalent. So that's 4.65 times more than what the Russians end up paying their equivalent personnel. But the overall disparity in payments and wages is at higher ranks is probably a lot larger than 4.65%. We probably see a major separation between what the United States pays and what Russians do. Now, this pay difference is huge in understanding how our budget compares to other countries, because the less that these countries pay their troops, the more money that countries like Russia and China can invest into some of these different areas like research, development, test, and evaluation, more in the areas of procurement, in maintenance, things like that. And that might be done at a higher proportion of their budget than we do in ours. And that can help make up the difference in the total disparity in how much we pay for our defense budget and how much these other countries do, because they are not paying as much for labor as we are. So hopefully that drives home one of the main points that I wanted to make for this video, and that is a substantial portion of our national defense budget goes to pay for salaries and benefits to our armed service members and civilians. 39.14% is big, and that is one of the reasons why we have such a large defense budget, to be able to pay for those types of things. And how that compares to some other countries as well who are adversarial or are potentially adversarial, and how they are not spending as much on labor costs than us. So when you take the labor costs out of the equation, you're going to find that things are probably a little bit more even when you look at some of those other categories like RDT&E, operations and maintenance, things like that. Now, the next thing that I wanted to take a look at is purchasing power. Now, I found a great article from breakingdefense.com late into making this video and also doing some of this research, which wonderfully explains this aspect that you need to consider when understanding how our budget relates to other nations' militaries. Since I know you guys didn't come here for an econ lesson, let me quickly go over purchasing power so you can understand this next section that I'm going to be talking about. So you may know that if you go to another country, and let's say you have $100, you could very well be able to buy more with that $100 than you could being able to buy the same amount of stuff in the United States. So what purchasing power parity does is it basically levels the playing field by making all things equal. This is helpful in understanding other countries' GDP and stuff like that. So for us and how it relates to what we're going to be talking about, we're going to apply purchasing power parity to the defense budgets of China and Russia to get a better understanding of how much they really are paying compared to the US budget. Make sense? Okay, I hope it does. So one of the things that Breaking Defense did a phenomenal job on in their article was illustrating what purchasing power parity looks like between us and some of these other countries by looking at the 2017 defense budgets of these three countries. I'm going to recreate these charts just for the sake of ease of viewability, so all credit for this data really goes to them. Okay, so the first one we're going to take a look at here is 2017 stated expenses for defense budgets. Now, the reason why I put stated expenses on there is because it's very difficult to know how much these countries spend because their data isn't nearly as public as what the US is. So the US spent $606 billion in 2017, China $228, and Russia $66. So when you take a look at this chart, it really does look like that we are outspending China and Russia by huge margins. But remember, that is what this video is about, and maybe purchasing power parity is going to change how some of this looks. So we'll take a look in the next chart what the stated expenses are, which is what you're looking at right now, and what the stated expenses look like when you factor in purchasing power parity, and that is this one. So we see some pretty substantial differences in how much China and Russia are actually putting into their defense budgets. China has basically doubled, going from 228 to 435 billion. Russia has basically increased almost 2.5 times, going from 66 to 158 billion dollars. That is huge. Now, to kind of put this into perspective, remember we had taken a look at earlier about personnel costs. So if we look at 2017 at these purchasing power parity numbers and take out US personnel, you get this chart. So without personnel, the United States spends $356 billion on those other categories that we had seen earlier. China, outspends us when you take out those labor costs. Now, since we looked at Russia not paying their armed forces nearly as much as we do, China does the same thing. So their labor costs do not equate near ours. So what is important for this is China may be spending as much in those other categories of the defense budget than we are, and that matters a lot. There's other factors to consider as well when you're comparing these countries too that are important when you're taking out how some of these countries will pay for certain things. For example, we spend a lot on research, development, testing, and evaluation, but we know that China has done a lot to try and to get into our intellectual property and take it for themselves. That is big because they don't have to invest in that type of research when they're just going through and stealing it. So where these numbers actually equate for some of the things that matter most and what a lot of people consider when they think of the national defense budget, things like procurement, research and development, operations and maintenance, may be far more even between Russia, China, and the United States than what is typically known and what most people would expect to see with some of these numbers. So hopefully this helps you better understand where we're at compared to some of these other countries. So to go back to the initial question of, is the US military budget as large as people think? Yes, but also not in what most people think of with what the defense budget is. Those three categories that I mentioned earlier. Operations and maintenance, when we're taking a look at RDT&E and procurement. If you're comparing those, it is not as large as a lot of people think, not by a long shot compared to some of these other countries. So hopefully you learned a little bit in this video too and kind of helped you understand a little bit more. Comment below and let me know what you guys learned, because for me, that is important to help build more videos like this in the future. Also tell me what you like and didn't like. Again, since this is a YouTube channel, like the video if you enjoyed what you saw. In the link below, you'll find the link to Patreon to help support me in the work that I'm doing, making videos and doing research like this. You'll also find the link to the Discord as well, where we have a lot of great conversations in there about the military, some of the videos that you see, and other stuff too. So you're welcome to be a part of that. Anyway, thanks for watching, you guys. I appreciate it. War is hell. You don't have to worry because warfighters got your six.